Tonight, Newsnight is here at the historic Union Chain Bridge over the River Tweed, one of the most powerful symbols of the connection between Scotland and England. Just 1 year from now, this could be an international border. Tonight, we're asking an audience of undecided Scots, should it be? Good evening, live from the River Tweed. On the great stone towers that stand at either end of this bridge, there's a Latin motto that reads Vis Unita Fortior, which means roughly, united we're stronger. It was put there in 1820. But 1 year from now, will the Scottish people hold to that view and the Union, or will they vote to make Scotland an independent sovereign state again? And what would this border look like then? We brought leading lights from the rival campaigns to this bridge to try to win the hearts and minds of our audience. Early this evening, they made their case, and later our undecided voters will be returning here to the bridge to cast their votes live. Here's how the night unfolded. A year from now, the people of Scotland will vote. The question on the ballot will be, should Scotland be an independent country, yes or no? And all the polls suggest it's the undecided gathered here tonight who will determine the future of this country.
I hope to hear a lot about the economic side. I'd like to hear about the Queen. Lots of things. I'm sure things will come up that I never thought I needed to know about.
It would be very nice to be, I suppose, a bit more informed. A connection to Europe, the trade, the involvement with Europe, and with how we'd be affected by not being, part of Britain, essentially divided away from Britain, the rest of Britain. I think, especially being on the border, it's quite a big issue for us where we live.
The latest polling puts Better Together ahead by between 10 and 20%, with about 1 in 5 voters still undecided. So the result of next year's referendum is still far from certain. It's these men and women the campaigns must now convince. Tonight we'll be thrashing out some of the big questions about the economics of independence, the future of Trident, whether an independent Scotland would be in NATO, who gets the oil revenues if Scotland votes yes to independence, and how would Scotland's close relationship to England change if Scotland was a sovereign state. On the panel, voting yes to independence, the Deputy First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, and Pat Kane, cultural commentator and musician. Voting no a year from now, Margaret Curran, the Shadow Scottish Secretary of State for Scotland, and the businesswoman Tessa Hartman. Now, we are going to kick off with short pitches from our main protagonists, Nicola Sturgeon and Margaret Curran, on the toss of a coin, so here goes. Which would you like? Would you like heads or would you like tails?
Heads.
Heads. Heads it is. Nicola Sturgeon, make your pitch for independence.
Scotland can more than afford to be independent. We're one of the wealthiest countries in the world. We more than pay our way. In each and every one of the past 30 years, when oil prices have been high and when oil prices have been low, Scotland has generated more tax per head of population than the UK as a whole. So there is no question that Scotland can be a successful independent country. The question is, should we be? And my argument is that it's better for all of us if decisions about Scotland are taken in Scotland by the people who care most, those of us who live and work here. We've demonstrated that with the devolution of power over health and education. Independence is about completing the powers of our Parliament to bring home powers over the economy and welfare as well. Scotland's future in Scotland's hands has got to be better than leaving decisions in the hands of Westminster governments that very often we in Scotland don't even vote for.
Margaret Curran.
The debate we're having in Scotland, the debate we'll have tonight, is not a question of whether Scotland could be independent, it's a question of whether Scotland should be independent. You know, Scotland's got its own parliament now. We make real decisions here in Scotland about real issues that matter, health, education and housing. But I also think we benefit being part of that broader partnership that is the United Kingdom, where we pool resources and we share risk. As we saw during the recent financial crisis, I really think that helped Scotland and that was really important for us. But the question we have to ask ourselves if we go for separation in the referendum that's coming next year, will it actually benefit us? Will it help our children? Will it help our grandchildren? Because it's a decision that is permanent. You know, I love Scotland. I want to do the very best for my country. But I have to ask, is the risk of uncertainty, of separation, is it really worth it, where we can really benefit from the partnership of the United Kingdom, have a strong Scotland and a strong Britain working in partnership together, rather than the division and the separation I think that the SNP propose?
OK, that's the opening pitches. Now we're going to begin with a discussion on the economics of independence. First, a thumbnail sketch. A new poll suggests Scotland would go for independence if it made people richer. 47% would vote to leave the Union if it made them just £500 a year better off. The SNP claim they'd better that. There would be £800 more in people's pockets because the Treasury takes more from Scotland in tax than they get back. But how well would Scotland fare going it alone? Let's start with revenue and the black stuff. The SNP reckons there are 24 billion barrels of oil left in the North Sea, and 90% of it is in Scotland's waters. Down in Westminster, the forecasting is more cautious. The value of what's left depends on a volatile market, but the latest estimate puts the tax take from oil sales at £56 billion over 20-odd years. What would independence mean for businesses operating on both sides of the border? And could the Scottish Government continue to spend in the same way? Scotland is spending about £20 billion more than it's raising each year. Public spending's reckoned to be about 10% higher north of the border. And then there's the gigantic issue of debt. What share of the UK's more than £1 trillion worth of public debt would Edinburgh have to take on? Oh, and don't forget the little issue of the RBS bailout. Should that all be dumped on Scotland? Or is it a Westminster problem? A poll today says that Scots would be £500 better off, and that would make a difference to them. That would be one of the big things that would make their minds up. The SNP says it's £800 a head better off. Margaret Curran, would Scots be better off in an independent Scotland?
Well, I would challenge the very premise in which Nicola put her argument, which is to say that Scotland pays more into the United Kingdom than we get in return, and we challenge directly her figures. Because the Institute for Fiscal Studies themselves and many other commentators have said that actually more is spent in Scotland than we actually give back. Now, I think that's right. I think we deserve that because it should be based on need and not nationality. But I do think the Union works for Scotland, and I think that's the best way to go forward.
But would we be better off or worse off?
In independence? Well, on the basis of that, then I think we would be worse off. I also think economically, I don't think that that would help us because England is our biggest exporter. Why would we turn our biggest exporter into a competitor, not a partner, when it can work to our dual advantage if we stick together?
So the idea is that, according to the Scottish Government, we get more per capita of what? Is it 10% or 14%? How are you going to pay for these things? How are you going to pay in an independent Scotland for free prescriptions, free personal care? There will be no tuition fees. The benefit cut to the spare rooms will not be implemented in the independent Scotland. Where's that going to be paid for?
With the exception of the last example you used there, all of these things are delivered in Scotland right now, and we pay for all these things in a balanced budget. I believe Scotland will be better off as an independent country because I believe it's better if we take decisions about our own future ourselves. But I also believe we'll be economically better off. Margaret said we've got higher spending in Scotland. Let me just give you two statistics. In the last year, we've got figures available for 2011-12. Spending on benefits was about £60 a head higher in Scotland than in the UK as a whole. But in that same year, we contributed £1,700 more in tax per head than the UK as a whole. So let's have no nonsense about Scotland not being able to afford to be independent. We can absolutely afford it. The question is, where is it best to have decisions taken? Here in Scotland or with Tory governments in Westminster that very often we don't vote for? And that's the heart of this argument.
What do people in the audience think? Would it make a difference if you thought you were going to be £500 better off or £500 worse off or what? Would that make a difference to you? Gentleman there, yes, with the check shirt on. Tell me about that for you.
I mean, I think if we were going to be £500 better off in an independent Scotland, that would obviously give credence to the argument about Scotland being better off as a whole. But I suppose I'm slightly sceptical because we just don't know at this point. We're being told, obviously, that we will be better off by the Yes campaign, and we're hearing the opposite story from the No campaign.
See, the problem is, Jim Gallagher, just coming to you here, the problem is that we just don't know in Scotland. People in Scotland just don't know the true figures, do they?
Well, I don't think it... first of all, I don't think I would buy and sell my country for £500. I hope nobody else here would. But let's understand, first of all, what kind of figures we're talking about. What Nicola's been talking about is public spending and taxation. And it's quite easy to understand what that actually is.
And of course, you being a former senior civil servant, you understand too.
I've spent a lot of time adding up these sums. Okay. Straightforwardly, Scotland onshore, leaving aside oil for the moment, raises about 1% less every year per head in tax than the UK. Scotland spends onshore about 11% more than the UK. If that was all there was to it, Scotland would be in big trouble. But of course, an independent Scotland would have the oil. The oil almost makes up the difference. And the problem for an independent Scotland, however, was if it spent all the oil, it couldn't save it as well. And if you're going to have oil, one of the things you should do with it is save it. But you can't both save it and spend it.
To your left, Ivan McKee, who's a businessman who supports independence. You're shaking your head violently at that.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jim's been a bit disingenuous with the numbers there. I mean, I'm not blessed with a civil service career. I spend my time buying and selling companies, so I spend a lot of time adding up numbers as well. I started off being a bit sceptical about the numbers last year, and I had a good look at them, as if I would do as if I was buying a company. And I've been right through all the numbers, and they're all available on the internet for anybody who wants to look at them. But basically what they say is exactly what Nicola said. Scotland raises £1,700 more per head than the UK average, spends £1,200 more per head than the UK average. So the finances are extremely strong in that context. There's absolutely no debate about that. It's a fact.
Well, let's look at this question of oil. Glenn Campbell and Alex Massey. Alex Massey for the Union, Glenn Campbell for the BBC. Where do we stand on oil? Because, of course, the oil price is volatile. For the nationalists to say that a lot of their spending is predicated on the oil price is very tricky, because we don't actually know in the United Kingdom whose revenues are whose, do we, from the oil?
Well, oil is obviously a huge resource, and much of it would accrue to Scotland. It is assumed in the event of independence. As you say, the value of oil goes up and down. What the SNP would hope to do is to tuck away some of that money and save it, as Norway has, to invest in future and for times when things are tougher. The question that was raised a moment or two ago by Jim Gallagher is, at what point would they be able to do that if on day one much of the money was already allocated to other things?
Alex Massey.
Well, one of the things is that we don't hear very much about an oil fund from John Swinney anymore, because John Swinney is a realist, and on current projections there isn't going to be the money for an oil fund and the spending commitments that the SNP have currently made, or for the future of an independent Scotland. But one of the things that we also see is that, according to recent polls, something like 59% of Scots expect taxes to go up after independence. And it's not difficult, but only 29% think public services would improve. And it's not difficult to imagine that this puts something of a brake upon people's enthusiasm for independence.
People used to use these self-same arguments before the Scottish Parliament was in existence. I remember people saying business will leave, taxes will go up, public services will deteriorate. None of that came to pass. On the contrary, public services have strengthened in Scotland. We've not seen taxes go up. Scotland is doing well, not without its challenges, with the Scottish Parliament. What we want to do is complete the powers of the Parliament and take it to its logical conclusion. And remember, living standards in the UK right now are falling. The power of independence is getting your hands on the levers of the economy to grow the economy faster and make people better off that way.
We'll talk about getting your hands on the lever of the economy a little later on when we talk about the debt and so forth. But we've got a young woman in the audience here who wants to come in.
My question really was about the affordability and the kind of difference it would make in everyday lives in terms of people's finances and things. And a lot of that is, there's a lot of changes in public services and integration of health and social care, for example, and all these huge change processes. And I just wondered what you see as the affordability and cost of those processes, aside from the actual real benefit you see in difference in finances.
So we've got an ageing population. The idea of free personal care is going to, the need for that is going to grow exponentially. Interestingly, I know on the English side of this bridge there is no free personal care. On the Scottish side there is personal care. How, Tessa Hartman, do you think people in England view the idea of this, as it were, the kind of bounty that comes to Scotland in terms of free personal care and no tuition fees and so forth?
I think they're probably very jealous, but I think it's also very interesting because I sit here as a small business owner, but also as a mother of 4. And a lot of these questions are, you read about them all the time, but yet I sit here still in so much confusion because they're asking us to make asking us to sign on the dotted line to divorce essentially from England without actually thinking about what the terms of the contract are. So me as a mother, you know, how are we actually going to, what's our tax rate going to be? I've read so many things that our taxes are going to go through the roof. My biggest customer, I work in the fashion industry, and my biggest customer in the entire high street retail is in England. Our Scottish high streets are made up with businesses whose head offices are in England. The first time we talk about economic crisis, we refer to consumer spend. You know, these are all really worrying. I am seeing for sure budgets that are being taken away because of the uncertainty, the unknown, the questions that yet can't seem to be answered. So although many people might be...
But in Scotland, businesses thrive, don't they, in a global economy? There's lots of businesses that do very well in export.
Yes, they absolutely do. But, you know, our job is to compete against the Europeans, the French and the Italians and everybody, and we must be stronger.
How many countries in the world would want all of Scotland's terrible problems? You know, all this natural resource, all these world-class universities, all these thrusting companies with their high technological expertise. We're really in trouble.
Yeah, but that funding comes from the UK government.
Sorry, just let me finish the point. I mean, the point about completing the powers of the Parliament is that we should have a perspective on Scottish growth. If we have a problem about revenue, we should be planning the country to grow economies, to grow prosperity, to grow skill and talent in the country.
Well, let's see the gentleman back with the specs on. Yes.
Yeah, it's very interesting to hear about Scottish growth because I'm part of the education industry, if you like, at the moment, and all I'm seeing is cut back, cut back, cut back. I'd like to know exactly how much of that £500 per person would be scaled up to look after the education system. Because we're implementing at the moment the curriculum for excellence, and there's no money behind it as far as I can see. It's just you'll have to cut here, you have to cut there.
Would there be an exponential increase in money for education in independent Scotland? You couldn't guarantee that.
Difference, well, I mean, Tessa said, what's the tax rate going to be? Margaret couldn't tell you what the tax rate is going to be in 5 years in the UK. These are decisions made by elected governments and budgets the way they are in countries across the world. The benefit of independence, in terms of the gentleman's question, is instead of the situation just now where we pay our taxes, all of that goes to the London Treasury and they give us a block grant back. We keep those taxes here and we make the decisions for ourselves about how we allocate that money.
The one with the check jacket on, yes.
Surely it's like your coin, Kirsty. There's two sides to it. Can Scotland afford independence? And can Scotland afford to stay under Westminster?
There's a great statistic I heard the other day.
Margaret Kern has been for you.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been trying to get in because I would challenge some of the facts and figures. I imagine it must be really frustrating if you're not terribly involved in politics to hear two politicians and people always saying this figure's right and that's figure's right, and I appreciate that. But it is absolute fact that more is spent in public expenditure in Scotland, £1,200 more in public expenditure in Scotland than it is in the rest of the United Kingdom.
Let's turn now to how an independent Scotland would actually operate, what it would look and feel like. Let's start with the currency. What would the change in your pocket be? Alex Salmond wants to stick with the pound and create a sterling zone. But would that be the Treasury's call? The Chancellor has already said he's worried about being tied to an economy so dependent on oil and financial services without retaining some degree of national control. So, would Scotland have to create a new currency, the pibroch perhaps, or join the euro? But that gets us to the thorny issue of European membership. As a new country, would Scotland have to apply for membership and then join the currency? A process that could take years. And would it be the same for NATO membership and the issue of defence? The SNP says it would build its own army of 15,000 soldiers, restore historic regiments and replace the intelligence agencies. Calls for £2.5 billion. And while we're on really intractable problems, what about Trident? The SNP wants a country without nuclear weapons, but the UK's nuclear deterrent is based at Faz Lane. To relocate would cost billions, so the Ministry of Defence is said to be looking at designating the area sovereign UK territory. And would the same have to happen to Balmoral? Alex Salmond says he wants the Queen to remain the head of state, a view shared by most of the Scottish public. but others in the independence campaign have mooted the idea of a republic. Nicola, right at the very beginning of this debate, in your opening pitch, you said, in fact, I think the words were, what you wanted was Scottish decisions about Scotland made in Scotland. But the way that you characterise the debate on independence means that what you want to have is you want to have the sterling, you want to have sterling, you want to be possibly part of different defence decisions, you want to keep the monarchy and so forth, you want financial institutions to still be the same. These kind of decisions are not going to be within your grasp. If you want to stick to sterling, you'll be in hock or in thrall to Treasury decisions in London.
Interest rates, for example, are not set by the Treasury, they're set independently by the Bank of England. We want to keep our pound. It's as much Scotland's pound as it is the pound of the rest of the UK. But independence gives us fiscal powers, it gives us the powers over tax and our welfare state to do the kind of things we've been talking about, get our economy growing, create jobs, create the wealth that then funds the public services we want.
Alex Massey, do you think it will be necessarily in Nicola Sturgeon's gift if Scotland was to vote yes, whether or not Scotland kept the pound?
I think that's hard to predict with any certainty, but what we can say is that everything Nicola has just said about the advantages of a sterling union are what she and other senior members of the SNP said until very recently about membership of the euro, which of course would bring up many of the same problems as a sterling union within the UK. And the SNP's currency position is one of convenience and political opportunism as much as it is of principle, which is absolutely fine, but it's designed to eliminate uncertainty. It's not because they actually have suddenly realised that sterling is the best answer for Scotland. It's their third currency position in 20 years.
Well, Ivan McKee, you want, as a businessman, to come back on that?
Yeah, I mean, very quickly, that's, again, that's about bending the truth. There's a number of parties that have changed position on currencies over the last few years, so to say it's only the SNP policy isn't accurate. And I mean, I'm not even SNP, but I think I needed to call you on that one.
I'm in Yes Scotland. Yes Scotland has Greens in it, as Scottish Socialists, so there's a discussion to be had about the currency future of Scotland.
But do you want your own currency, or do you want to stick with a pound?
Ultimately, I want my own currency, and I think the thing about a currency union is that I think it helps to stabilise the relationships between the two new countries. I think eventually Scotland should have its own currency. I mean, that's kind of the Green Party position, that's the SSP position. But I think the point is made about the currency at the moment being backed by Scottish oil. I think it's a compassionate act for Scotland to say, no, seriously, if we're going to manage this separation, let's manage it sensibly in a way that's supportive and that's having a discussion across the borders. But ultimately, I think, yeah, we should have a separate currency.
I mean, as a layperson, I'm astounded that you think it's acceptable that you have three different positions on a currency. You know, you can't ask someone to wipe out 300 years of history and change your position on the most fundamental issue that's going to keep our economy going, and that is currency.
You know, and also a year to your referendum, you're going to have to presumably come to a much sharper position.
And it seems to be going back in time, because one minute you're saying let's separate from Westminster, and undoubtedly your fiscal decisions will have to be led by the Westminster government. So as a layperson, what is the point of that? What is the point of that?
What we will be asking people to vote for next year is the currency union that I've described. You know, in the future, if a party was elected that wanted to change that, then they would have to have the democratic backing of the Scottish people. That's how democracies work.
Gentleman right in the back row with the blue shirt on. Yes, you had your hand up. Yes, fire away. Fire away.
I think we're all sitting here waiting for a positive answer, and we're not actually getting a positive answer. We want a promise fulfilled. Nicola just said that Scotland is the richest country, or going to be the richest country. Can she tell me, are we going to still get student fees, free prescriptions and everything in years to come? Is this promise just until after the election?
Let's just get the promise.
If the SNP's in power, yes. Labour have said they want to end these things, but I will give you that commitment from the SNP.
Let me just nail you on that, because I don't think you're talking really about the next year. You're talking about the future in Scotland. Can you guarantee that if you had independence and that indeed you were in power, in a decade, you would have free tuition fees and free personal care? Because people are not making a short-term decision here, are they? They're making a long-term decision.
Of course, but politics is about priorities, and this government has demonstrated over the 6 years now that we've been in government that these kind of things are priorities. So we've allocated the money. Right. We've balanced the budget, incidentally, in the Scottish government over all these years when Westminster's been running a deficit, and we've delivered these policies. That's the commitment we've shown.
The other area where there is absolutely clear blue water is on the question of Trident. Now, what you're saying is vote yes to independence and there'll be no more Trident. Now, there's a lot of undecided people in the audience here. I wonder where you all stand on the issue of Trident. Never mind the cost of decommissioning and sending it somewhere else, if it could ever be sent anywhere else. Just a quick show of hands. Who supports getting rid of Trident? I mean, with all that it would entail, who supports keeping Trident? So I would say that's probably 2 to 1 against keeping it. But what's your position going to be here? Because you want to stay in NATO. The nationalists have said now they want to stay in NATO. It may not be as simple as that. NATO may not be open to you if there is a dispute over Trident.
Well, our position is that we want to be in NATO, but our opposition to nuclear weapons is non-negotiable. Can I just say as a point of fact, there are 28 member states of NATO, 25 of them don't possess or host nuclear weapons. So that's actually the norm in NATO for countries to be nuclear free. We're talking here about finances. We spend tens of millions of pounds maintaining Trident. The proposal is to spend perhaps £100 billion in replacing Trident. That is simply obscene.
And
I think one of the benefits of independence will get rid of Trident.
Is it obscene to keep Trident?
Well, I want to get rid of Trident. The point is how you do it. I don't think necessarily, if you bear with me, I don't think necessarily the idea you just...
So the Shadow Scottish Secretary, hang on a minute, the Shadow Scottish Secretary of State wants to get rid of Trident, but it's not party policy.
No, I want to get rid of all nuclear weapons. No, let me finish. Let me finish. The debate is how you do it. I don't think, morally, moving Trident 100 miles down the border actually solves the problem. I think you're much better engaging in international discussions to rid nuclear weapons. But the challenge for the SNP is they say on the one hand they want to get rid of nuclear weapons, but they want to join NATO, which has got a nuclear umbrella, and that's the point about NATO. It is governed by a nuclear umbrella, and everyone signs up to that to join NATO.
Let's be quite clear. Let's be quite clear about this, Jim Gallagher. Am I right in saying that a country cannot necessarily join NATO if there is a dispute over its weaponry? In this case, it would be a dispute over a Trident.
Why?
NATO is a membership organisation. It works by unanimity. All the members have to decide whether somebody gets in or not. Nicola's right, of course, there are NATO countries without nuclear weapons. But what there aren't is NATO countries that have thrown out somebody else's nuclear weapons.
What do you think would be the impact of the relationship between Scotland and England if an independent Scotland threw out Trident, there was nowhere else for it to go? Therefore, the people of England who had not voted to get rid of Trident found themselves nuclear-less.
Well, and maybe the English people would take the same view as the majority of this audience. Maybe they don't want Trident, but you don't make your decisions about independence or not in order to determine English nuclear policy. That's a decision that has to be made on its own merits and for its own reasons.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think the pragmatics of it would be that if we got rid of Trident, I think the MOD, as we hear, are minded, you know, to just get rid of it entirely. I think it's probably a fallacy that can be without.
Are we talking? How long would it take to get rid of it? Are we talking 10 years?
I think as soon as possible.
But how long is it? Nicola, this is something you clearly know.
CND have produced a report saying it could safely be done in a couple of years. We've said we're responsible. It will have to be the speediest, safe removal of Trident. But, you know, Margaret's position is inconsistent. She says, I want to get rid of all nuclear weapons. How is that consistent with a UK position backed by Labour that wants to replace Trident?
Just in a quick position of fact, Mark, what is the position you have about the idea mooted that actually the whole area around Fastlane where Trident is could somehow be sovereign UK territory?
That's nonsense. And interestingly, the MOD mooted it down the street, distanced itself from that ridiculous idea within about an hour.
Audience, gentleman at the back's got a question.
The argument about Trident is irrelevant to the referendum. Whether you want Trident or you don't want Trident isn't the question that we're going to answer in the referendum. The question we're going to answer in the referendum is, do we make the Trident decision in London or do we make the Trident decision in Scotland? And we're going to make that decision sometime later. And it won't necessarily be in accordance with SNP policy.
Yes, why not? That's a point. Why not, Nicola Sturgeon said, this referendum is about long-term what people think about Scotland. It's not about what the SNP think about Trident. And wouldn't it be better to have a referendum and then say, then there'll be a general election, and if you vote for whatever party comes out of the SNP, that doesn't want Trident, then you can get rid of Trident. But why not make
Well, there will be a general election. If we become independent in, say, March 2016, which is our target date, there'll be a general election in May 2016. But I'm being honest with you, the SNP wants rid of Trident. I think that's backed by majority opinion in Scotland, and we'll start the process for the removal of Trident from Scotland so that we can invest the money that currently is spent on Trident in the things we were talking about earlier on, things that are far more useful to the people of Scotland.
Well, now let's think about independence and Scottish identity. Now let's think about independence and the Scottish identity. The question of identity is a complex one. Scotland has always been a mongrel nation, and Scots and English have been intertwined for generations, especially here in the border area. Would these relationships change with independence? The nationalists insist that it was questions of democracy, not identity, that were the heart of the referendum debate. But would carrying a Scottish passport, having only the saltire to salute, and singing Flower of Scotland for Olympic gold medals give people a new sense of being Scottish? If Scotland was to take full rights and responsibilities for nationhood, would it actually enhance relations with England without Westminster to blame for any of the nation's ills? Or would Scotland's position as one of the smallest countries in the world, rather than a country in an historic and powerful union, diminish the Scottish nation? Pat Kane, I understand that the royal families all got together in Balmoral. Alex Salmond has said that, he wants the Queen to be the head of state. How would you feel about you having a King George and an independent Scotland in many years hence? Would you support that?
I'm not hugely excited about it, to be perfectly honest. I think if there's a bicycling monarch, if we head that way, that's fine. I'm basically a Republican. So I'm not... I think it's one of the least contentious points in the whole range of things that the variety of people who support independence on the left, like me, would get bothered about. I think ultimately I'd want them to be on their bike rather than bicycling. But,
OK, well then, let's put another question to you. Do you think it's possible to be a patriotic Scot and vote for the Union?
Of course it is. You can be patriotic to your idea of the country, that's fine. But I think, it's interesting, we're just over the tweet here, and I keep thinking, looking at this, how arbitrary it seems. But if you were two Scandinavian countries next to each other, you would say that's also arbitrary, but nevertheless we're going to do things differently across this border. If you were two European countries, France and Germany, you would say there's an arbitrary line, but we're doing things differently here and there. It's really not a difficult concept. The idea that you can have two countries next to each other that have radically or significantly different socio-economic priorities. It's not hard.
The woman in the front row, yes.
The first time I felt engaged with the debate when you're talking about an independence and a different way of doing things. When I hear the politicians arguing about fiscal this and paying for that, I think, well, it's more of the same. My head listens to those arguments and I remain unsure which way to go. My heart says, this is an opportunity to do something so different. And that's what I'm not hearing.
There's an idealism about it.
Margaret Curran, the people actually in Scotland want to do something that is different.
Well, and I think that's the strength of the Scottish Parliament. I've always believed that. I'm very Scottish. You ask me my nationality, I'll always say Scottish first. I also feel partly Irish, but I do feel British as well. I was quite proud that Andy Murray won in Wimbledon too, and that British people cheered him. That made me feel good as a Scot and a British person. But I think the fact is, I don't think it's. I never heard that. I don't think it's Scotland versus England. I think it's Scotland and Britain, and I think that's our strength. And I think I'm very comfortable being Scottish. I don't think that threatens my culture or my different priorities.
You're an author. Your readership is all over the world. How do you think? If Scotland voted for independence, how would it alter the relationship? Here we are actually on the border. How would it alter the relationship? Because surely it would. It would have to.
It would be a great showcase for Scotland. I think becoming independent initially would be a boost culturally for Scotland, a boost for us as an identity, as an awareness internationally. But I think artists, writers, musicians like Pat and I, that's not why we want independence. And another reason I don't think many people want independence, it's interesting, I think Margaret has said several times, I feel very Scottish, I love Scotland. You hardly ever hear people on the yes side say that, and it's not because we don't need to. It's because Scottishness is not the same as caring about Scotland's future. This debate is not about whether you feel Scottish. It's not about what your background is. It's not about a sense of Scottishness. It's about talking about Scotland's future, it's about deciding Scotland's future, and that's got nothing to do with who you feel you are. It's got to do with what we want to do with the future of Scotland, that excitement.
Do you feel, Tessa Hartman, that actually a sovereign Scottish state with rights and responsibilities would, in a sense, not be able to, not that I'm suggesting that people do whinge at Westminster, but wouldn't be able to blame Westminster for any of the nation's ills?
Well, I think what we've got to distinguish between, we talk about ideology and, you know, wouldn't it be great, but that's not reality. There are loads of things that I would love to do that aren't the right thing to do. And what I can tell you, we're talking about my sector. Now, you know, we're struggling in a retail environment with supporting new industry textiles. All the best of British designers right now at the top of their game, trading all the way across the world, are Scottish. How did they get there? They got there from the support and the grants from the British Fashion Council and the British Trade and Industry sector, not Scotland. Now, they have to go on. They are so proud to be Scottish, incredibly proud to be British, but the reality is they wouldn't be there without the support of England.
So do you feel, Margaret Curran, you know, here we are on the border, do you think that the border would be open or closed? In the sense, not closed, but that there would be border controls in England and Scotland. Could you see that happening?
Well, that would depend on what arrangements, perhaps maybe immigration, if you would imply that. But part of
crossing borders.
No, of course you can, and of course, no, you should. But can I just say, maybe part of the reason why I emphasise my Scottishness is because I have to say, people who are on my side of the argument have been accused of being anti-Scottish. You know, MSPs, genuinely have been accused of being anti-Scottish. I'm sure that Nicola and Pat would disavow that, but that's maybe part of it, because I think it is really important, this debate. It's quite a fevered debate already. I can imagine it's going to get quite fevered as the year goes on. That it is important that those on my side who do see that Scotland gets advantage, not just that it's good to be nice to your neighbours, but we actually get advantage as we do through sporting. I think, you know, athletes get trained, fashion designers get advantage through that. I think that would be a loss to Scotland if we became independent, and I think that's a genuine argument that should be respected.
Tess Hartman, you're up and down to London. Do you have any concerns about the border?
Well, I do, because if I'm going to have to stand in a queue to make a daily commercial trip to business down to London, and it's going to take me hours, that's going to have a serious impact on the business day. Well, the British government, the Home Secretary, has said that she would have to instigate border control, and I'm surprised that you're against that, because you do want a separate country. So why are you so offended by the idea that they're going to have to police that border? They're going to have to watch that border in terms of immigration.
Scotland will be in the common travel area with the rest of the UK and Ireland. Ireland and the UK, two independent countries.
But you don't know what a government in London would say.
We're all going to hear competing claims in this debate. We've got to apply common sense. You know, for the UK to force Scotland out of the common travel area, or to force Scotland out of Sterling, wouldn't just mean the UK acting against Scotland's interests, but acting against England's interests as well.
Let me just put that to Margaret Curran. Margaret Curran, would a Labour government in Westminster institute border controls?
I don't think we would want border controls, but the key rests on if, for example, Scotland decided that it wanted to have a different immigration policy. Hang on, Nicola, let me speak. Hang on, Nicola, let me speak. If Scotland wanted a different immigration policy, which had direct implications for England, then people may have to say, not maybe through policy, but they may have to police it differently. So the issue is, Nicola can't guarantee that in an independent Scotland. It may or may not happen, depending on the policies implemented.
You spend 50% of your time in London or Glasgow. You may have to stop at the border.
No, it's got to work for me. I live and work on both sides. I mean, I have access to a world city called London. There could easily be a world city called Stuttgart, New York, Paris, London, Munich. And we're all Europeans. We're all on the island of the UK. We all will be able to move around very, very easily. It's the most sensible thing to do.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to ask a very final question of Nicola about identity. Is this debate being characterised by economic questions, cultural questions, political questions? What is this debate going to be about in the next year?
I think it'll be a mixture of all of those things. For me, it's not about identity, first and foremost. I'm the granddaughter of an English woman. I represent a lot of folk in the south side of Glasgow who support independence, but would, if asked their national identity, would say Pakistani or Indian. So it's not about identity. I think the best thing that could happen to the relationship between England and Scotland is Scotland becoming independent and it being a relationship of equals. The best comment I've heard tonight is the ladies here. You know, let's stop arguing. Margaret started, as I did, by saying we don't doubt Scotland can be independent. Let's accept that and let's focus on the kind of country we want to be and how we build that kind of country.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard what our panel have had to say, and indeed you have quizzed them. Now it's time to ruminate before you vote live on Newsnight tonight. So they heard the arguments, and our audience of undecided voters have been thinking hard about how to cast their votes as they wander around this spectacular setting of the Union Train Bridge on the border between England and Scotland, which could be an international crossing point a year from now. So these men and women, the undecided, hold the future of Scotland and the United Kingdom in their hands, on Newsnight at least. I have 2 ballot boxes here, and we'll be counting live as people decide, should Scotland be an independent country, yes or no? And with me to give an instant reaction, the businesswoman and unionist Tessa Hartman is here again, and the cultural commentator and pro-independence campaigner Pat Kane. So the time for talking is over. Let's start the vote. Bring it on. During the debate, wasn't it extraordinary? The woman who said that, you know, the first time she'd really felt engaged is when we started talking about what it felt like to be Scottish, and a lot of it's going to come down to that, Pat Kane.
I think it
Whether
is,
you like
but
it or not.
I think it's a necessary fact war. I think it's a grown-up act to try and figure out how to run your own country. I don't think there's any point in downgrading the fact that it's properly demanding to think about independence.
But do you think this is going to be about head or heart or a mixture of both?
I think a mixture of both. And it's programmes like these when people can get to debate and fire and argue and almost educate themselves into where they see it going.
They're growing. There's a big expansion going on in both head and heart. It's a good thing. It's a basically good thing.
Now, wait a minute. Tell me, how did you vote?
Yes.
And why did you vote yes? Because you were undecided.
Yeah, I was undecided before, but I think the delivery and the oratory was definitely there for the yes campaign. But I still feel there's a lot of content and answers that are still required for some of the questions raised tonight, but definitely more on the yes side.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And tell me, you've just voted no. So what was it about the debate that influenced you tonight?
There was nothing in the debate tonight or anything up to this point that's actually convinced me that moving towards independence is going to be to any benefit of anyone in Scotland.
You a businessman?
I'm not a businessman, no. I'm a fire officer. Have been a fire officer for a number of years, and where I am at the moment, I'm quite happy with the governance that we have.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. The arguments, though, about, you know, whether it's, you know, politicians or whether it's lawyers, economists, whatever, you know, the point is there's not going to be a settled position. There will always be different positions and different figures. And so, therefore, it's going to be very difficult for people to make, you know, they'll make informed decisions maybe, but it'll have to be on hunches as well.
It'll have to be on hunches. It also has to be about looking around you in the world and seeing what other small nations are capable of and can do. And I think one of the things is, are we confident enough to do it? I think we're totally capable and we're totally resourced to do it. I think there's just that wee step, which I hope Scots go over the line, about being confident about doing it, because all these other countries that we might measure ourselves against have had their national revolutions at the turn of the century. They got their independence. We're a bit late to the game. I think we can get there.
But it's a different kind of conversation here, isn't it? It is not about, you know, this is not about being out in the streets like Catalonia. It's nothing like that. At all. It is a much more measured...
Very reduced conversation, Kirsty, as you know.
And also, it'll also be the case that for a lot of Scots, they will not publicly say what they think till towards the end, because people are quite naturally reticent.
Well, they're very reticent, and I think that's where we all have to start to speak up and inform each other. But it means so many different things to different people, because I think that's interesting about tonight. It's not really about what the politicians say anymore. It's about what it means for me as a mother, as a wife, as a small business person, and it's got so many ramifications for just everybody that it's got to be a personal and a heart decision as well.
Let me just connect someone else now. You've voted yes. So what's your reasoning?
Well, I think in the end you have to weigh up the long-term benefits of independence against the short-term risks and uncertainties, and I think you've got to hopefully believe that those short-term risks are manageable. So you've got to go for it. So,
I mean, basically what you're doing is you're not looking at the next 2 or 3 years, but you're saying that it's not just for Christmas. You're making a decision for the next generation.
Well, exactly, and the next generation after that. So I think you've got to hope that Scotland, standing on its own, can, you know, sort its problem and go for it, whereas all these short-term risks, which I think are definitely there, hopefully are manageable, so let's go for it.
Thank you very much indeed. And let's see now, we've got a few more that are sort of coming through still. But the idea that there's going to be some kind of different relationship with England if there's a yes vote is absolutely true, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I mean, it's bound to be.
It's a separate state, so it has to function as a separate entity. You've put up a border. Your biggest trading partner is now not that partner. You're a separate, independent nation working with your own financial situations.
Yeah, let's cut to the chase. There will be a difference. And the reason why the Scottish Parliament had to exist was because we had a consensus of values that we wanted to go in a different direction. That gap has actually increased since the time of the Scottish Parliament. So at some point, we're going to have to act on that consensus of values. Independence allows us to do that. And it's a realisation of a process whereby you restore a parliament, you feel you've got the capability for the powers, and you want to go the next step. That's a positive act. It's not an anti-anything act.
Well, we have our vote here, and the number who are going to vote yes for independence is 30, and the number who are going to vote no, they wish to stay in the Union, is 18.
Oh, wow.
So, first reaction to that?
Well done, everyone.
No, does that surprise you, given that what we've been hearing now about and hearing and seeing in opinion polls?
OK, well, the theory that we have in Yes Scotland is that the more that people engage with the issues, the more likely they are to drift to yes. But the point about the process is it's an enlarging process. It's about connecting up your head and your heart. It's about dealing with facts, but also dealing with aspirations. It joins it all together.
Your reaction to that?
I am surprised, but I think what's interesting, so many of the people are still putting the faith that the Scottish Government can deliver all these promises, because the reality is they don't know the answers. And they said there, I'm not very sure of how it's going to be, but I'm still going to vote yes. That's a big gamble to take. It's a very big gamble. And I hope that gamble pays off, but I'm still absolutely 100% against it.
Come on, you.
No! Well, thank you very much. Of course, that was completely unscientific, but debates like these will be happening all over Scotland between now and September the 18th, 2014. Tonight is just the start. And if you want to catch up with what's been happening at the Liberal Democrat conference in Glasgow, James Landale will have the highlights immediately after this programme. But from the beautiful border between England and Scotland, from the River Tweed, a very good night.